Yo, shout out to the jumpers. Much love to the jumpers. Looking at plyometrics for basketball players part 2. And in order to be certain or try to be sure about anything, it makes sense to look at studies, look at the available scientific literature of anything. In the 21st century, we've pooled and accumulated so much knowledge. We don't really need to go by opinions, and we don't really need to go by our own trial and error at this point. We don't know everything, but whenever we can, we should go through the literature and decide for ourselves. And we have Google for that. So, again, don't base it on my opinion. Look at the studies, and we will decide for ourselves. So, this article, Nick Grantham, it's a review of the literature. It's not one study. It goes through and looks at all the studies and tries to see what there is. So, um, the study approach is not foolproof, right? Because not every study is correct. Not all the conclusions drawn from studies are correct. We can stretch them too far and all that. But it's a scientific attempt, which is important. It's important to just try to be scientific. It gives us a better chance of being correct than if we're just going by guesswork or, someone's opinion. Even if they're super good at jumping or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean that they know the truth of the science. So, this article looks at tons and tons of studies. There's not actual links to the studies at the bottom. So, I mean, you can look at it and say, this is BS, I don't believe it. You can also go on Google and search for the studies, and that would be the way to go. But for me, I'm not necessarily trusting that, okay, this is definitely correct, but I'm saying I can find the studies if I want. They're cited, and there's tons of them in here. Therefore, just going to go based off this research. I don't need to go deeper, but I could if I really wanted to. Yeah, there's a misspelling here, so you can decide based on that as well. Plyometric training can cause serious injuries is the idea. And again, in looking through this, I'm not saying that plyometric training is not useful. I'm not saying that it's not used. It's scientifically supported to be useful in explosion, and it's used by, you know, elite explosive athletes. I'm saying it's not for everyone, and if you choose to use them, use this knowledge and structure your training in a certain way to protect your body. So just to skim through this, should we start out leaping from tall buildings in an attempt to improve athletic performance? Look before you leap. Look at this scientific research, is all it's saying. There is growing evidence to suggest that gains made from practicing plyometric drills may be outweighed by the risk of severe injuries attributed to this training method if practiced incorrectly. So again, not saying plyometrics are strictly bad, but use them with caution and try to structure your training deliberately. So if you don't know what plyometrics are, check the last video. Basically, it's a maximal, you jump and land and you take a maximal force load to rebound in the opposite direction. So this could be a way to land in basketball, could be a way to jump in basketball, a way to rebound, stuff like that. So basically, it's the most forceful, it's extremely forceful. You try to apply as much force as possible. So again, really heavy impacts and force loads are associated generally with arthritis in the long term. And again, we're looking at, older people potentially. We're not looking at one instance of training, but over the decades, what's going to happen, right? Which is why there's a dichotomy, a split between what's good for the short-term explosive professional athlete who is sacrificing their body for the 5, 10, 15 years they're playing their sport versus the average person who isn't getting that much from it necessarily from sports and is ideally going to use their body their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? Okay. Technique required. Talk about depth. A lot of this is looking at depth jumps, where you hit a drop, you drop off something and jump as high as you can. So this is really interesting. Spinal shrinkage. Sports participants taking part in repeated high-impact activities have been identified as a high-risk group for back pain and injury. Interesting in here. spinal shrinkage. So they measured the height of people before doing depth jumps and they got shorter. It's not really surprising. If you drop off a building, you would want to roll or slide or something like that, ideally, not just reverse the other way. That is how you're going to break your back. Right. We can use our imagination to figure out how this works. Talks about, yeah, spinal loading and all of this, repetitive exercise. Yeah, not necessarily what you want. Talks about knee, intervertebral disc compression, cartilage compression, addition of weight, increased height. So the more weight and the higher the drop can force alterations in technique, which can compensate with increased knee flexion, knee injuries. Patellar tendonitis is super linked to jumping and landing, obviously. So the nature, yeah, predisposes, exposed to high forces, knee is an area of particular risk. Patellar tendonitis is a list of potential injuries caused by plyometric training. During landing, the musculoskeletal system is placed under acute stress or impact forces, increasing the potential for injury. As soon as the foot comes into contact with the ground, the activity becomes a closed kinetic chain exercise. Extraordinarily high forces cannot be dissipated, so it's the musculoskeletal system. Specific incidences don't matter as much because they're just one person. An Olympic hurdler had acute knee pain as a result of plyometric training. One player required surgery for knee attributed by the surgeon to damage caused by plyometrics. One of the most severe cases linked to plyometrics, U.S. shot putter John Brenner. Depth jumping session, his quadricep became detached, ending his pro career. Marlene Audi ceased plyometric training after knee pain developed, etc., etc. So, I mean, there's enough evidence here based on studies for me to say, me personally, I don't want to do plyometrics. Not really. I mean, necessary sometimes, but I would rather cut the landing, make it shorter. I would rather roll. I would rather slide. We can go by the science. We can also use physics and see that plyometric training is the maximum forceful intentionally. So I don't want to take a 1,200 pound force load on landing. I want to down climb and then I want to roll or slide, run through the landing, and try to cut the force load as low as possible, because we know the higher the force load, the higher the risk of injury. The less the force load, the less the risk of injury. To close up, I want to say that plyometric training is not all bad. I'm encouraging you to decide for yourself. If you want to be an Olympic sprinter, if you're on pace to be a professional, even if you're going to be a professional basketball player, use them with caution, right? No matter what, it's not for everyone. Some of you might not want to do depth jumps, and for those of you who do, be careful. Set the drop low if you can. Don't do a ton of them. But even then, it's just so much evidence that, I'm not caring so much on opinion. I want to see sign. Yeah, it's just there's too much to go based on opinion. So, my recommendation for the general athlete is to just not even do plyometrics. And if you disagree with my conclusion, use science. So, peace, much love. Hope this saves some knees. See you in the comments. And if you think they're right for you, you should just know the risks first. So, hope this helps. Peace.